you, but I've become sort of numb from all the news lately. The white noise of continued gun violence, of shootings that happened that I'm reminded of just a few days later and I've already forgotten that they happened in the first place. But it's this image, of course, of the little boy in the red shirt. That's what got me to stop and contemplate in the stream of relentless online messages and news. And what a wake-up call it was. Because if this is what it took to get my attention about the ongoing refugee crisis, the dire situation in Syria, then there's something wrong, isn't there? Something is really deeply wrong. And maybe part of what's wrong is the knowledge we have of the goings-on around the world. Headlines on Facebook feeds and blog posts, along with 24-hour news cycles that never end. We know all the things, don't we? But do we? We know the headlines. We are inundated with them so often that we become overwhelmed by the sheer number of terrible, terrible things happening in our world right now, all at once. But what do we really know? The complexity of war and famine, racism, poverty, climate change, immigration are often reduced to two-sided arguments, when in reality the ingredients of these things are multiple and complex and ever-changing. It's our need to make sense of it all, to find categories, to take stances, so that, quite frankly, we can get some sleep at night, right? That lead us to simplify and justify so that we can just get on with living. So it seems fitting, oddly fitting, that we should be in the book of Proverbs today, a book based on common sense wisdom to teach us in our spiritual lives. And the book really has us learn these things through observation and experience in everyday life. The book of Proverbs insists that through our living, we will learn these things. So how fitting is it, as we read these words together this morning, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. And that one fragment of a sentence, for me, changes everything. In my imagination, the TV screen goes blank. The sound and the gleaming promise of answers and distraction blips off the screen. The computer screen, the smartphone screen go blank. We shut off the radio, we put down the newspaper, we take a deep breath, and we marvel at how loud the silence is. And what are we left with in that silence but each other? With the haunting memory of the image of the little boy who drowned, the little boy who had to flee out of his home because of war. So to be afraid of God, to have fear of the Lord, is to fall on your knees when you hear the words, God is God and we are not. It is to stand in awed silence in the presence of God, the very God who made you and loves you and can say that about all of creation. It is to be silenced. It is the ear-ringing, tongue-tying, stupefying power that only God can wield in our lives. Listen to this conversation between Lucy and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver from the book and the movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as Mr. and Mrs. Beaver try to describe to the human being children the fear of the Lord. Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Ooh, said Susan. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking They're either braver than most or just plain silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about being safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. So the fear of the Lord, the fear of the God who created the universe, the same God who created you and I and wants to be in relationship with us, that's the prerequisite for wisdom, is that fear in knowing that God, right? It's because this fear, this proper fear, teaches us our place in the world and how well to live in it. Because once we recognize that God is God and we are not, and we find that particular place God has created for us, well then, it leaves us utterly dependent upon God. It gives God all the power, because God is the one who has written the commandments of love on our hearts, knowing that our brains alone just can't handle it. It's like they short out. Wisdom that comes from God, revealed in Christ Jesus, also reveals the substance of our hearts, which is terrifying, isn't it? Because when we acknowledge that God is God and we are not, then all our God-like notions are revealed as frail and wimpy and mean attempts to control and conform, things that just aren't in our control, right? A few timely examples of this. So Kim Davis, you all have heard that name in recent days, right? In case you haven't, she's the clerk of Rowan County, Kentucky. She's in the news for her refusal to issue marriage licenses to same-sex partners wanting to get married. And through both her words and actions, she is revealing the substance of her heart. What she has interpreted as God's law, she is using the United States law to practice against others as an elected official called to serve and uphold the laws of her county and her country. Second example, it was just a few weeks ago when the Ashley Madison website got hacked, revealing names and addresses of people seeking to cheat on their spouses. So well-known celebrities and pastors and priests alike were revealed in this hack. And I, like many others, cast a weary and a wary eye as I saw this news, and kind of with a shaking of my finger, right? Tisk, tisk. Look at that embarrassment, right? It seems that the substance of their hearts were revealed for all of us to see and say, what a shame, right? But what if? These are two extreme examples that maybe we can't see ourselves in. So what if? And I'm speaking from my little broken heart here too. What if there was a website called holdagrudge.com? And let's say holdagrudge.com was hacked. Would your name appear in that list of people? Someone who just hasn't been able to let it go already or forgive? How about a website called, well, they got what they deserved? Would the contents of your heart be revealed on a hack of that website? So the question I've wrestled with all week, in the face of this, of the knowledge begins with the fear of the Lord, is this. This is my question. Are we more afraid of being found out on the internet or in the local paper and around town than we are of being found out or fully known by God? What are we more afraid of? Our reputations or standing in front of God? And my hunch is, and I'm speaking from my own broken heart here, is that, gosh, I'm kind of concerned about my reputation, right? Online and around town and in front of you. Because at the end of the day, we do know that we stand in God's judgment. and that God's mercy is part of that. That we are forgiven, right? That God knows grace and mercy, and the internet doesn't always know grace or mercy. Our knowledge gets us into trouble. We Google and we scroll and we try to make sense of it all through our knowledge. We try to depend and we try to lean, which is a great image now, lean on our own understanding, what we know and what we can see. We depend on all that we have learned. But then all that we're left seeing is a little boy washed up on a beach. All we can see are the names on that naughty list, right, from Ashley Madison. All we can see is a hard-hearted woman we would love to hate. It is so much easier to hate Kim Davis than to wonder in her life what she's been taught about being a Christian, what she's been taught about God, and what she's been taught about what is involved in marriage, right? It is much easier to shame all those found out and exposed on the Ashley Madison website than to wonder and mourn with them the kinds of broken relationships they've been living in. Think of all the hurting people in their marriages in this country. That marriage is suffering in our country, right? It's easier to judge them than to seek out and wonder and offer help and empathy. Well, in light of all this, it is no wonder that the writer of Proverbs continually goes back to our heart. Listen to this. But let your heart keep my commandments. Let your heart keep the law of the Lord, right? Write them on the tablet of your heart. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Because the heart, you see, can change. And when our hearts are changed, it always leads us to each other. It always bridges the gap that we've created. It always connects us to each other. It's terrifying, right, to have our hearts changed. It's terrifying, and it's the only way. It's the only real way for us to change. It's the only real way we will remember that we are called to love each other. And it's the only way we remember to follow the God that we love and who loves us. So it's no wonder we are paralyzed by fear, because we've given our fear to all the wrong things. We're fearing all the wrong stuff, which is why God works through our hearts. It's the spot where change happens, where transformation happens, because someone's mind, I don't know about your mind, but my mind is not easily changed, but work on my heart and I'll change. Change is everything. And when that happens, I mean, just think of in your life when something has changed that you couldn't have imagined changing, right? It's beyond our comprehension. It's beyond our knowledge. It's beyond our understanding. It's beyond all of that. You see, according to God's law, written on our hearts, and not within the realm of our own understanding, there is no such thing as other people's children. That little boy washed up on the beach, he is ours. He belongs to you and to me, and I think that's why we're aching now, right? That's why we're aching. Do you remember that Jesus was a refugee? He was an infant, and his parents had to flee to save his life and theirs. He was a refugee, and Jesus says we belong to him, and because we belong to him, we belong to each other. Thank God, right? Because we cannot do this alone. There is a reason we are to fear the Lord, and it's because only then, only through our fear of the Lord can God really mess with our hearts. Right? If we truly fear the Lord, then we don't put up a hand and we say, I got this, God. It's no big deal. I'm fine. No. What's wrapped up in the fear of the Lord is a trembling surrender. What's wrapped up in the fear of the Lord is awe wonder. What's wrapped up in the fear of the Lord is our crying uncle to thinking we've got control of everything and that we know more than God. What's wrapped up in that fear of the Lord opens our hearts to the broken, aching world. It opens our hearts to love as God would have us love. It is beyond our understanding, but it is within our hearts. Thanks be to God. Amen.